Hello and welcome back. Today I'm upgrading the part cooling fan on my Sovol SV06. Let me start by saying that the stock fan setup isn't that bad. The main reason I'm switching is because I like to have a good view of my nozzle while I'm printing. And the placement of the original fan kind of blocks it from straight on. Having a good view of the nozzle really helps out to make sure that I'm not having any of those first layer woes. I found a couple ducts on printables that I thought looked pretty good, and I finally settled on this one until I realized it was for a 40-20 fan, and I don't have one of those. I do have several 50-15 fans laying around though. That's when I stumbled onto this remix of two different cooling ducts. I'm not the biggest fan of these wings on either side, but it's going to be on the back of the hot end, and how often do I look at the back of it anyway? So I downloaded it and got to printing. The prints turned out well, albeit a little stringy. That could just be my PETG needing to be dehydrated. It's a good thing I also have this Sovol filament dryer. Now let's get the old fan and duct off and get this one installed. First, I removed the 4 screws holding the fan onto the hot end. This brought the duct with it. After removing those, there are 2 more screws holding this adapter plate on that the fan screws onto. Because I won't need any of this anymore, I put it all away and grabbed the newly printed duct. I started by lining up the 2 little fins on the back side into the slots on the back of the hot end. Once those were in, I was able to put 2 M3x12 screws into the opposite end of the print where the 2 screws were that held on the adapter plate. I decided not to remove the screws on the back of the hot end that would go through the wings on either side of this duct, because the front 2 screws make this secure enough, and the original design of this duct doesn't use any more screws to mount it than those 2 either. After that, I took some gaffer tape and my X-Acto knife and made a sort of gasket to go on the shroud. This will pinch between the 2 parts and keep any air from seeping out. This might not be necessary, but I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Then I used 3 M3x8 screws to mount the shroud onto the duct. Now it was time to solder. The plug on the 50-15 fan is larger than the plug on the stock fan. So I eyeballed how much wire I would need and cut the end off of both fans, leaving enough wire on the stock fan to reuse it elsewhere if need be, but also taking enough that I had plenty to solder onto the new fan. I tinned both sets of wires and then slipped some heat shrink over the wires before soldering them together. Then I used the top side of the iron to melt the heat shrink. Once that was done, I plugged it in and seated the fan on the shroud. I used an M3x25 screw and an M3 nut to mount the fan onto this bracket. But it was really loose, and if I tightened it too much, the fan pulls out of one side of the shroud. I'm pretty sure that's because this bracket here is too far to the right. So I just left it a little bit loose enough not to pull the fan from the shroud. And as you can see, I left too much slack on the wires, so I ran the wires as best I could and just used a zip tie through the other mounting hole of the fan to get the slack up. I vaguely remembered seeing a wire guide on this model, but I guess I was mistaken. It was actually on the original model, but it didn't make it into the remix. I went over everything again, turned the printer on, and decided to run the bed level again since I was sure I had moved something around during the install of this. Once it started the home, the hot end went to the left side and the belt started grinding really loud, so I quickly shut the printer off. That's when I realized that those wings that I didn't like to begin with were too thick to get past the frame. Even if I had put screws in to hold it down, it still would have been too thick, by what looks like at least 3 millimeters. I'm not sure how the original remixer got this to work on their printer. I mean, comparing the remix to the original, you can see it's quite a bit thicker. Anyway, I went back to the drawing board and spent a couple hours remixing the originals myself. I came up with this new remix of the shroud and duct that should be more secure and not get anywhere near the frame of the printer. This also has 2 brackets to hold the fan in securely. In order to print this, I needed to use the printer, so I just clipped those wings off, and this is what that ended up looking like. I printed parts of this out of PLA to make sure that they bolted up correctly and that the fan was in there snug. Then, I started printing my remixed parts. I added another gasket made out of gaffer tape to the duct side, but not for any particular reason. This time I decided to screw these together before mounting it with 4 M3x8 screws. If you're planning to use this, pro tip, put the fan wire in the guide before you mount it. I totally knew that and didn't make that mistake the first time around, I swear. I swear! But other than that, the mounting process remains the same. The only thing I did different this time was swap the original brass nozzle for a hardened steel nozzle while I had the room to do it. I picked up a 5-pack of these on Amazon for about $6. It's a good thing I changed the nozzle when I did, because it appears that the original nozzle wasn't tight enough and filament was leaking out from where it's threaded to the block. I heated the nozzle and scraped some of this off, just enough to where the wrench could fit and I could remove it. Then, while it was still hot, I popped the new nozzle in and tightened it down. Once the block cooled down, I tried again to tighten it a little bit more. Now that it's mounted, I can go ahead and mount the fan using that M3x25 screw and nut, and the fan fits so much more securely now. And that's it. Not only do I have an improved part cooling fan, but I also have a pretty good view of the nozzle, so I'm able to see right away if I have any issues on the first layer. If someone wants to print this, I'm going to upload it to Printables, and I'll leave a link in the description. Alright, that's all I've got for you today. If you enjoyed the video, leave a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you're not already subscribed. I appreciate you tuning in, catch you in the next one, and as always, have the best day ever.